Because I guess after my dad's passing, my dad was only 47 years old when he passed away from leukemia, and it made me realize that you can't take a day for granted.
How does the faith comes into play in terms of conscience, in terms of serving and other values?
But my faith is also a personal and private thing. I respect, dignity, accountability, ensuring that there is equality amongst how you treat people. Faith for me keeps me in check all the time, or when there are moments of difficulty, I have complete reliance on God. Like, I know that God is watching out for me.
So the way you talked about weaponization of faith, if you can talk more about tokenization of these different tokens.
Multiculturalism shouldn't be confetti that we sprinkle around just to tick a box. But how do we use those points of differences or different views to influence policies, to make sure that all voices are heard? Politicians don't always have the answers. It's people out there who are struggling, who are day-to-day issues that if you were to tweak the policy just a little bit, it would have immense impact on people on the ground.
How might we think from a mental health point of view more broadly?
Their view is that we need a tailored approach in the way mental health support is provided to various communities. Let's change things up, because clearly death by suicide is rising. The occurrence of mental health complications is increasing amongst young people.
Welcome, Fatima. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me, Deb.
Thank you for your time. I know that you're very busy in this period of the year, and for this time with us. Before, I think there are so many list of questions I have, and I was preparing the interview last evening, and there were so many things I could ask, but I would want you to start with your core values, your purpose, and if you can link that with stories from your growing up and some experiences.
Wow. I mean, how much time do you have? Because we could be here all week. I guess if we're talking about my core values, there are things that make me who I am, that dictate and guide my moral compass, and also reflect on my upbringing as an Australian, Muslim, Afghan, living here in WA, one of the greatest states in the nation. And I guess one of the key values would be perseverance, that my beloved father, he passed away 2018, that he instilled in us, not ever giving up. For him, no was never the way to go. Like, I can't do it wasn't a phrase in our household. Whether you're a girl or a boy, having the belief that you can do it, that you will keep trying, that practice makes perfect, and you really had to, push yourself to become the better version of yourself. So growing up, and understanding that my background being from Afghanistan, my parents having to flee war, and seeing that you come into this wonderful land of opportunities, you don't take anything for granted. You work twice as hard, you make sure that you're contributing back to the community and society, but at the same time, you're making something out of yourself, because you know that if you were back home, or back where you were born, you probably wouldn't have those same opportunities, so you don't let it go to waste. And another value would be courage. Having the courage to not just speak your truth or side with justice or ensure that equality is upheld, but having the courage to be your true self, having the courage to be your most authentic version when it comes to not just leading, as I'm doing as a senator, but having the courage to pick battles wisely and fight them right. So I'd say courage, perseverance and honesty, being true to yourself. So I think they all have that element of trueness, and the fact that, you know, it all can be seen through the lens of service. So growing up, I've been a big believer of giving back to the community, volunteering my time. Many people out there find great joy in volunteering. You know, you pick up skills, you improve your confidence, the way you communicate, your networks, but also ensure that, you know, you find your purpose in life through that service to community. And so for me, it has just been the most remarkable experience, volunteering, giving back to the community, and that's how I stumbled upon politics, because growing up as a hijab-wearing young woman, I never expected to be or to see myself in politics in the Australian Federal Parliament, because you're in this sort of fight or flight mode when all you're doing is trying to seek safety and security in this new country that you find yourself. But because I came here as an 8-year-old, came to Australia, this has been home. So when there are moments where you're faced with discrimination and racism, you just don't understand why you're singled out when you've given back, but also you see yourself just as Australian, as someone else who may look different to you.
Yeah. You talked about perseverance from a point of view of your family giving those values to you. But as a young girl in the school, what were the people around you, you know, your friends, some role models at that growing age, to teach you by role modeling those things? And if you can talk more of that, what were the role models growing up beyond your father or close circle, and any role model who were women to give you that intention or that value of perseverance?
There were quite a few women, but also men that played the role of being people that I aspired to become. My year 10 teacher, Saida Jassett, she was incredible, from teaching us how to be more feminine, but at the same time empowering us to ensure that we never see ourselves any less than a man, for example. To ensure that, you know, her teachings always resonate, where she would quote things from Maya Angelou. She would talk about what the future holds for us as women. I went to Australian Islamic College, so from year 7 to year 10, it was ladies only. So it was this incredible period of my time where I was surrounded by, you know, women who were aspiring to become astronauts and businesswomen and get in the science field of becoming, you know, innovators. And it was wonderful to sort of be in a thriving environment where you felt like, you know, the opportunities are endless once you get out there. So I would say that teacher really played a key role in reaffirming those ideals or values of perseverance and courage, and really pushing yourself to achieve your goals and outcomes. And I think it was sort of year 11 and 12 where I adapted a lot of my leadership skills, being part of the student council, being the first head girl of my school, and taking on that leadership role quite seriously, a bit too seriously sometimes. So I was called the teacher's pet because all the teachers loved me because I was, you know, you're perfect, you know.
You're doing what teachers
everything.
Want them to deliver.
That's it, like the ideal student. In saying that, you did get away with a few things here and there. But in terms of role models, my circle of friends weren't that big. In fact, during recess and lunchtime, I would hang out with the teachers more than I did with my peers. So for someone who was quite young, I developed quite a greater sense of maturity to just have conversations with adults. And I think it would definitely be, my closer inner circle that I sort of looked up to, reflecting on my mum's struggles, for example, coming into a new country, learning the language, and getting into the field of driving instructor to actually teach people, predominantly women, how to drive, because that's a privilege that they wouldn't have maybe in countries they were from. So to ensure that that female empowerment aspect was highlighted, she would not only be teaching them how to drive, but teach them words, English words here and there, improve their language skills, give them a heads up of, what could potentially come up in practical examinations and how to best prepare for it. So seeing that, and despite all the hurdles that my mum experienced, she still pushed through. So yeah, I would say, again, politics was never forefront of mind, so I never delved too deep. I just thought I'd probably become a doctor at some point, which clearly didn't happen because I faint at the sight of blood. So I would just make a very poor doctor.
You could be a psychologist.
Could be a psychologist,
psychiatrist,
actually.
Much easier.
Not?
Much not easier, but easier to not to see blood.
Yeah.
You talked about the value of serving and volunteering, and how is the idea of politics so foreign when your core belief or value was serving, and then politics is essentially to serve your fellow men and women?
Service comes in various shapes and forms, obviously. You could serve as a local councillor, you could serve as an NGO, Meals on Wheels, or whether you're running hot soup kitchens for the homeless. Service comes in various forms. The reason why I didn't see myself in politics is it was a foreign concept to see myself in the capital of the country representing an entire state, and obviously having a law or a legal background, because that's what I thought. If you want to get into politics, you've got to do politics and law studies at university. Or it was a very naive point of view, thinking that someone that looks like me would not be up there. Why would they? I haven't seen anyone that looks like me in there previously, so I don't stand a chance. So I actually did sort of create those barriers and think that's beyond my reach. That's something that I can't go into. And I guess it wasn't until my dad passed away in 2018, and in order to deal with my grief, I plummeted myself into more volunteering and took up so much just extracurricular activities and commitments on top of the university degree I was doing, just to not be alone with my thoughts. And this could be a little side tangent, but that's why mental health is so important for me. Understanding that, there's got to be ways of dealing with your grief, and it needs to be normalized, because in certain communities it's still quite not a foreign concept, but quite taboo to not engage too much into mental health, or even seek professional help or go on to medication. But we'll park that for now. Coming back to, I guess, why or how I stumbled onto politics. I was volunteering my time emceeing at various events for not-for-profit organisations, and that's where I met an upper house member for the state government. And he suggested, his name is P.A. Yang, he suggested that that we catch up for coffee at the end. If I ever wanted to know what a day in a politician's life looks like. So I take up the offer a few months later, post the event, and because I was the UWA Muslim Students Association president at the time, I was like, oh, look, it would probably be good to have a chat with a politician and see what, student leadership avenues there may be for me to get involved in. Again, it was just volunteering. How can I volunteer more of my time? So I meet up with him. He suggests I volunteer for the Labor Party in the upcoming 2019 election. Because growing up, I was always a Labor voter. I mean, there was no questions about it. My dad would always say that that's how we lean as a family. And I remember handing out how to vote cards on the election day 2019. And after that, that evening, driving back home, Pierre calls me and he goes, do you want a part-time role in my office? And I was like, what? I don't have experience, but sure, I'll take it. Because I guess after my dad's passing, my dad was only 47 years old when he passed away from leukemia, and it made me realize that you can't take a day for granted. You've got to make the most of every moment, take every opportunity you can, because you don't want to live life with regrets. So for me, it was, yeah, sure, I'll give it a crack. If it doesn't work out, then at least I would have tried. And if it does, well, then great. So that's where my journey into politics began, where I just immersed myself in the youth wing of the Labor Party here in WA, picked up so much, became secretary of the branch, like it was on, NBN speed, picking up everything I could, the party structure, the way unions are involved, how different branches operate, how the state executive works, how the federal party works. And so it sort of did 2 years at Pierre's office, and then I moved on to United Workers Union as a political organiser. And that's when I really started to see, wow, like my dad really struggled. We would hear stories, but you think that it's only happening to you until you hear stories from other people, and I saw my dad's struggles reflected in the lives of thousands of other workers, and I was like, wow, like I'm really making a difference here by being part of this union. Talking to these workers and ensuring that they knew their rights and whatnot. And yeah, it was sort of in my second year at the union when I was tapped on the shoulder and asked, do you want to run as a Senate candidate, number 3 on the ticket? You won't win, were the exact words. You won't win the seat, but it's just good campaigning experience. And at 27, you're like, yeah, why not? Like, I'll give it a crack as long as, as long as I don't win. But here we are, fast forward.
Good fun times. There are 2 angles from here. One is, as a person of faith, how does, people talk about you can keep your faith, when you leave your house, in the house, or, bring yourself to work. And then part of yourself is your faith, and part of yourself is, all other intersectionalities of the person you are. So how does the faith comes into play in terms of conscience, in terms of, serving and other values?
For me, my faith determines my moral compass, but my faith is also a personal and private thing. I hold the values of my faith, which is just very similar to what we would want as human beings, respect, dignity, accountability, ensuring that there is equality amongst how you treat people, but also how you, represent yourself with honesty and integrity. I don't see that to be exclusive from my interactions with everything else. Like, in fact, me being a person of faith keeps me accountable at all times. Accountable from a sense that even if people are watching or not, whether I have the audit office on my back or not, I will still do what's right by the people I'm serving, but also do right by my family, my community, because I know God's watching me and I'm accountable for my actions to God. So I think it keeps you in check. Faith for me keeps me in check all the time. Or when there are moments of difficulty, I have complete reliance on God. Like I know that God is watching out for me. Now, in saying that, that doesn't need that element of my life or those internal conversations with myself is not projected onto anyone else, is not impacting the way I interact with colleagues, interact in the workplace. In fact, if anything, it makes me better in communicating to ensure that I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt, that I am treating them with respect no matter how they may be responding to me. Because at the end of the day, you know, my faith, and I'm sure there are other faiths that preach the same, it's to hold yourself at a higher standard, to ensure that, you know, regardless of how people are treating you, that you always maintain your values. And so I think, if anything, my faith makes me a stronger and a better person. But at the same time, I don't go around imposing my beliefs and my values on other people. You know, like we only have control over how we conduct ourselves and how we respond to situations. We don't have control over other people. And I think there is a sense of liberation in that, knowing that, you know, you can be the best version of yourself, and if others interpret it or take it however they want, well, that's on them.
Could you elaborate on the idea of the politics of faith, when faith is used as part of the as a political tool or as a political narrative on many sides, in many ways, good, bad, and ugly? So, what do you see from a politics of faith point of view, which is good, bad, and ugly?
Well, it's wrong that faith is politicized. It is wrong that, you know, it can be weaponized, just like how many other communities or organizations can be weaponized. And I think that's just the dirty world of politics at times, you know, where people would use anything against you to alienate you, to make you feel different, or to pursue their own agenda. I mean, case at point, it was very evident what I had to go through during the period where I had crossed the floor on a matter of conscience and justice. And then during that whole turmoil of wanting to leave the party, all the backgrounding and all the news reports that came out to vilify the fact that I was a practicing Muslim. The same very reason that the Labor government was so proud of me being a person of faith, a young, progressive Muslim woman who ticked so many of the boxes for them. But when the time came and they needed to demonize me, they used my faith against me. They used my faith to try to portray me as this person who's bringing secularism into politics, when we've had, you know, the Australian Christian Party for decades. Or there's always been an element of faith in Parliament House, for example. We do the Lord's Prayer every single morning before beginning our day in the Senate or in the House of Reps. So there's always been an element of faith since colonialism in this country. But the fact that they would use a faith that's foreign to them, or at least that's, you know, a minority or forms a minority in this nation, that to use against me, like when I said, you know, I mean, it's not like they hadn't seen me pray. It's not like they hadn't seen me observe Ramadan, which is the month of fasting.
Yeah.
In fact, they would come and celebrate it with me and ask questions. So the weaponization of faith is absolutely wrong. Whether it's any faith, really, under the spectrum, we need to be able to, debate and have disagreements without bringing personal matters like faith into the discussion or using that against them. There's also, it's quite funny as well that anything that happens within, say, the Muslim community or involving a Muslim person, the questions are directed to me as if I'm the lone voice or representative or spokesperson.
Of all Muslims.
Of all Muslims. And we know that, there's the faith and there's the followers of the faith. The followers of the faith can have various interpretation of the faith's teachings, but you don't blame the faith for their interpretation or their conduct or misconduct, right? Like, you hold each individual to their own actions. Whereas what we've seen in mainstream media is there happens to be an incident and all of a sudden the whole entire faith is tainted with the misconduct of one person.
I think there are good and bad people in all communities, and it's a standard bell distribution curve.
Yeah.
So every community will have their bad elements, and then they will misinterpret to their understanding. The tokenization of faith, the tokenization of ethnic background, the tokenization of your color, of your skin, at multiple levels, as in local council, state government, and the federal government. There are many committees or council positions which are funded, and there are people who will be appointed in those positions. So how do you see that sometimes people are appointed based on, not just they are from that background or a lived experience, but they have that skill set, they have the merit, they are good at what they do. That's why they've been appointed for a specific committee, not just because they are a specific token. So the way you talked about weaponization of faith, if you can talk more about tokenization of these different tokens. In your observation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've always said that multiculturalism shouldn't be confetti that we sprinkle around just to tick a box. We shouldn't just have a person of color or a person with a turban or a woman with a hijab in a photo to be like, oh, look, we are diverse. We tick all the boxes. Like, look at us. Because it comes from, multiculturalism should be implemented and celebrated systemically. Like, we shouldn't just celebrate the outward, external experiences of people, but rather how are the internal operations of an organization? How are these multicultural voices that may be different, how are they appreciated? How are they valued equally as a non-multicultural person's voice? Because that gives you the stark difference of, we just want you to look good in photos. We don't want to hear your opinions on the table when there's a team discussion, because you don't know. You're just good to be seen, not heard. And that's what we're trying to change. When I'm out there talking to people and encouraging them to put their hand, whether it's local, state, or federal positions, it's so that you're not just seen but also heard. That you have every right as an Australian to be in those positions. Your voice matters. Your contribution would make a difference. Because modern day Australia is very different to what we were even 30 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. So these bodies, these structures, whether local, state or federal, need to represent the population in a wholesome way that's more accurate than what we currently have. It's great to have people in, within your departments, but who are the executives in the department making the decisions. And that goes across the board in whatever sector you're from. Like, lived experience shouldn't just be, oh, it's great to slap it on our annual report. But how do we use those points of differences or different views to influence policies, to make sure that all voices are heard, that the solution is encompassing everyone's concerns and is catering to as many different, like appreciating the diversity that exists around us. And like there is absolutely, you're accurate in being merit-based, but you also need to empower people of multicultural backgrounds. You need to give them the opportunity as well. But you can't then give them the opportunity but silence them when it matters, because that's not progression. That is not taking us from point A to B. We're basically slapping on Band-Aids and just hoping that the optics is incredible, and that makes us look. It's very similar to organizations who won't comply, but they would put a label or they would put out an ad that would make them look like they are compliant or they are doing what's required of them.
I want to take an example from a federal point of view, which is there's a term called CALD, C-A-L-D, culturally and linguistically diverse, and public policy happens within that. So the definition of CALD is anybody who doesn't speak English as a first language, and which could be somebody from Eastern European background or South American background and Middle Eastern background or Southeast Asian or South Asian. So how can you club this heterogeneous group into one and give them a label called CALD and create public policy and then drive public policy in that direction and say, oh, well, we'll throw some money in the budget in this direction and then things will work?
So your question is
how does a heterogeneous group can be represented by a single term? How can you mix all of them together? Let's mix all of this together.
That's a $1 million question, isn't it? How do we do that? And yes, it's got its complexities, because even within each, subgroup, like South Americans or like Southeast Asians, there are other groups, subgroups. And so how do you make sure that you encapsulate all? And then we're not even looking at it from a faith-based lens, which each faith group would have their own different ways of doing things. So I don't have a clear-cut answer to that. But what I can say is more effort needs to be done in the way the government engages, and not just creates an echo chamber around them to hear from like-minded individuals, even if they do represent one of those subgroups, but expanding that and ensuring that, your everyday Australian who may represent a particular community group is able to have that contact or have their voices heard. And I think that definitely would happen from the way Senate inquiries are done. It's just that sometimes they're rushed. And we know that consultation periods can be minimised based on the government's agenda. It can really, prevent people from being able to come to the front and actually have their concerns heard. In terms of the labelling of culturally and linguistically diverse people, what if somebody identifies as culturally and linguistically diverse, but English is their first language, because they're born and raised here? It is a very restrictive labeling.
Limiting.
And very limiting, because at the end of the day, it boxes you, right? And it's like as if this cowed community has no other issues. It's just to do with the fact that they look different. That's not the only thing that, there are professionals out there who may identify as cowed, but are passionate about ending the AUKUS deal. That's a defense policy, something completely different. You can't limit them by boxing them into one and saying, oh, we've splashed some money, so they'll just be quiet and they'll just do their own little programs to, placate them and hope that they'll vote for you. Like, it can't be a vote-grabbing exercise. There needs to be proper structures in place. We've got all these ministries, but what is a ministry dedicated to ensuring that people from all walks of life, their voices are heard from, different fields? Like, yes, I'm not saying we should have a ministry for that, but just labeling them as cowed and shoving them to the side isn't going to work.
From a range of a functioning democracy and a dysfunctioning democracy, could you place us somewhere in between where we sit? And if you can talk about what are the telltale signs of a functioning democracy? What should be seen for an average person, or what's the experience of an average person for us to believe it's a functioning democracy or a dysfunctioning one?
That is going to definitely require some time to actually think of where we actually sit. But the signs of a functioning democracy, and again, depends. Like, are we talking about the government? Are we talking about the opposition? Are we talking about us as a nation? Because that again has so many layers of not just bureaucracy and elected officials conducting themselves, but just the way people would respond to whether it's a functional democracy or not. But from my short experience and time in the Senate, I've realised that the current government, the Labor Party, they show a facade of democracy, but it really isn't democratic. There is nothing democratic about a cult-like mentality of imposing a century-old rules on modern-day Australia and hoping to just get away with it. The fact that, across the floor on a matter of calling an end to the genocide and the recognition of a Palestinian state, yes, it's a foreign affairs matter, but through a democratic process where rank and file members had come together at a national conference of the Labor Party, voted and heavily debated on recognising the state of Palestine as a matter of priority, and that being put in a platform, yes, democratically voted, yes, you had people saying no and people saying yes, but the consensus was that we as in the Labor Party, will recognise it. Now, come the time when you've actually come into power, you've won government, and you don't implement that, and when one of your own elected members vote against it, instead of presenting them with a conscience vote and saying, you know what, that was a matter of conscience for you, and that was totally, within your right to do so as a member that was democratically elected by the people of Western Australia, you're within your own rights to make that decision. But no, it was, you must stick within the caucus lines. So someone else dictates what you've got to do, despite your members wanting you and calling on you to make a decision, but you hold back because you're listening to foreign powers. You're listening to other nations that have self-interest. And I think, so I did not see any level of democracy going through that whole experience where I was like, well, it should be within my own right to be able to voice my concerns. We were talking about service. As elected officials, it's within your purview to go and talk to your constituents, right? To listen to their concerns and understand what's going on and how you can elevate their concerns and voices in Parliament. what happens in a situation when you go to meet with a constituency, university students on campus, and then you get a call literally a few hours later from a senior colleague saying, who did you get clearance? Who did you get permission to go talk to these students? Why did you not give anyone the heads up? Why didn't you get standard lines to be able to talk to these students? And it's almost like, so I can't do the most basic aspect of my role as a senator for the state and listen to students who disagree with the government's position and they want their voices heard. So tell me how that is democratic. Or
the basic rights of freedom of thought and speech.
And it just appears to, day by day, the whole structure is starting to just fade away. We're not seeing any level of democratic freedom in communicating our thoughts. I mean, the social media ban, yes, parents out there think it's the best thing ever for anyone under 16 to not be able to access social media. But did you know that the consultation period was only 24 hours long? The government gave Australians 24 hours to submit their concerns about this ban. So we're saying that we can lock up children as young as 10 years old, but those same 10-year-olds are not allowed social media. We can get young people as young as, 15 to start working or, jump on their L's or whatever, but they can't have social media. Like that is, I don't know what direction they're headed, but it just doesn't look right.
So from a functioning democracy point of view, do you think when, people who have voted members, they are individuals and they're representing their members, but as multiple members of the parliament, you vote as a group, as a whole concerted group, and do you think, is that democratic? Because whatever the people might think or individual members might get feedback from the people, voting as a group is not a democratic mindset.
I don't think it is constructive when you've got various states. So for example, WA senators are expected, in the Labor Party, WA senators are expected to vote the same way as Victorian senators, even though the two states' makeups are different, their demographics are different, their geographical distribution is different. Like, you can't expect them to be okay with a piece of legislation that may benefit one over another. You need to be able to give, say, Victorian senators their right to say, you know what, that policy does not benefit our state, so we're going to either vote against it or we're going to, because this is what is best for our state. I mean, since when did the Senate become a playground for parties to fight for their interests rather than the people's interests? Because the Senate is for states to be represented fully, and each state's different in Australia. And so, yes, I must acknowledge that the Liberal and Nationals and the Greens, they have a conscience vote. They say, okay, if you are representing a state that have different views on a matter that's, in comparison to the party, then you can vote the way you want to. Whereas the Labor Party is like, nah, you're either inside the tent or out of the tent. And if you're out of the tent, well, we're kicking you out. And so, again, being the government, being a party in government and, a party that a lot of people out there thought that they were progressive, there's nothing progressive about them anymore, at least from what people are picking up in the last 2-3 years.
So, and as you are at the initial journey of creating your own party, can you talk more on the core values which you want to build this organization?
Yeah, so we've registered and we're official Australia's voice as the alternative party for many people out there. Australians have been wanting a party that's brave enough to make those bold decisions, but at the same time practical enough to ensure that, it's not our way or the highway, because Australians just want politicians to get on with the job. We want to ensure that we're bringing that courage back into politics. We're bringing common sense back into politics. Some of the issues that we see before us, it's just common sense. It's a no-brainer on how to deal with it. Whereas parties, instead of coming up with solutions, they're just politicking. They are, the two major parties, what we like to say the duopoly of the Labor and Liberals, they only think about their longevity in power rather than what is going to benefit Australians. They have this short-term mentality, and that's what Australia's voice wants to change. We need to think about generational change. We need to think about implementing policies that will have lasting impact rather than band-aid solutions just for the now and here. We definitely want to bring in a culture of innovation. Innovation shouldn't just be limited to business and the tech sector. Like, why can't we come up with innovative ideas on solving social policies? It was Einstein who said, if you keep repeating the same thing and expecting a different outcome, it's the definition of insanity. So why are we not changing things up? The housing crisis isn't just a problem that was created yesterday. It has been an ongoing, deliberate policy design that may have resulted from the various governments in power at the time, but nonetheless, no bold action is taken to alleviate it. Instead, we're putting billions of dollars into an AUKUS deal for these submarines that we won't see until, in 30 years' time. But at the same time, that same money, or even a portion of that, could go into helping our housing crisis. It could help with the cost of living pressures. It could help with the rising energy bills. But not only that, the transitioning into renewables. Why are we just so... The conversation is still around whether climate change is real or not. There are people in the Senate we're trying to convince that, no, climate change is real. The environment and biodiversity that needs to be protected needs to come from that transition into renewable energy. But where is that investment, right? And I think it's so important for us to have that level of justice and accountability lens put through whatever we're dealing with, whether it's First Nations issues. I did my WA tour in July, and some of the stark realizations that you come to learn on journeys like this, where you truly just listen to people. Politicians don't always have the answers. It's people out there who are struggling, who are, day-to-day issues that if you were to tweak the policy just a little bit, it would have immense impact on people on the ground. So why is our approach to leadership a top-down approach, where, people in Katanning would be like, we haven't seen any federal ministers come to us and talk to us about the live sheep export ban. We haven't been consulted about what that transition is going to look like for us. We have entire towns' livelihoods that are dependent on certain industries. Why is no one talking or engaging with us? You guys just come in your suits to our towns to take a photo and tick a box rather than actually engaging and listening. And so they were very surprised when I was like, hey, what is your problem? What are the problems you experience in this town? How can we help? How can I make sure that your concerns in a small town like Katanning or up in, Carnarvon, Yes, Broome, Kununurra. How can your voices be heard? Because WA is a massive state.
Yeah.
You know, Kununurra is very different to Esperance. And it was remarkable, you know, that sometimes you're in situations where you have a state Labor government and you have a federal Labor government, but stagnation. There is no progress. People are telling us things like Carnarvon is where like 75% of the country's fruits are produced and shipped over. People in Geraldton are like, we see the truck with all the incredible fresh fruit drive past us. They go all the way down to Perth depot centres, distribution centres, and then it goes all the way back up to Geraldton. Now, for your listeners and viewers who don't really understand the geography, Carnarvon to Perth is like a 12-hour drive. And Geraldton to Perth is a 5-hour drive. So you're looking at like a full 20-hour plus trip for people in Geraldton to get their fruit, for example. And it's moldy and it's overpriced by the time it reaches them. So like, again, it's a state and a federal matter. Like, why do they not work together to actually resolve such a simple issue? You'd see it as, oh my God, the solution is have a distribution centre in Carnarvon or in Geraldton. And that's it. It can service the northwest and have something for the southwest or even the east, because Kalgoorlie's forgotten. You know, like things like, it was quite shocking that in our current climate, how advanced we are as a first world country, situations arise where there may be dignitaries in town in Kalgoorlie and there are 2 Indigenous tribes that exist and they have this feud against each other. But when there's dignitaries in town, the common practice is to get all the Indigenous people off the streets, put them in a bus, and take them out to this place called Boulder Shack. And they leave them there for days until the dignitaries or whatever special function in town's done, then they bus them back into town. Like, tell me how that's happening in 2024, 2025 now, and nothing's being done. It's just such a matter of fact, like, oh, of course it happens. Like, why are you so shocked?
Wow. Can you talk more on your views on large economic reforms? Because in the current environment, both mom and dad have to work, or both people have to work, both mom and dad, husband and wife, both have to work to bring food on the table, have an average house, and have an average car. To live an average Australian dream, it cannot be achieved by single income. It has to be achieved with 2 dual incomes. So what are the economic reforms do you see in the coming years to have a long-term effect on economic outcomes for average Australians?
It's a big question, and definitely a question that economists should, be answering. But it's prioritizing what's important, when we have incredible state budget surpluses, but nothing is really being done to ensure that the housing crisis, for example, is taken care of. We cannot, of course, there's that whole debate on you can't just splash money because inflation's going to keep rising and that's going to impact everything, but you're seeing price gouging of supermarkets take place. You're seeing, certain privatization take place that is preventing people from accessing essential services. You're seeing the removal of bulk billing GPs. You're absolutely right that single income households can no longer deal with the rising cost of living, but at the same time, a lot of them are facing poverty. We've had conversations with various peak bodies who tell us that, food pantries are being visited by families that live in areas like Applecross, you know, the more affluent areas within the Perth metro region. Now, that's neglecting what's happening in our remote communities, who struggle to even get basic healthcare, let alone, you know, have the luxuries of being able to put their kids in a soccer club, or, you know, things that you would think every Australian family out there should have access to. Now, when I say prioritisation, the government could prioritise the way they spend most of their so-called investment in external, I mean, what comes to mind is the $7 billion missiles that Australia recently bought. Like, where are you finding $7 billion? Why can you not invest that into ensuring that we're upskilling our GPs, we're incentivising and increasing regional allowances, you know, and all it takes is talking to peak bodies like ACOS, for example, who have done, the research is there, the stats are there, like what needs to be done to ensure that people are not living below the poverty line. Wow. But it requires political will. It requires governments to reprioritise and see what needs to be done. And that's what, as Australia's voice, we're going to hope to hold that balance of power in the Senate, make sure that the government just doesn't ram bills and policies that will be at the detriment of Australians. Because in a first world country, you shouldn't be tossing between whether to pay your bills or ensure that your kids have access to soccer training, you know, or you're having to work 4 or 5 jobs around the clock and not paying your medical bills because you just can't afford it. It's those sort of everyday concerns, like people who are having to live in their cars because they can't afford rent. People skipping meals because they have just way too many outstanding bills. Even from an education perspective, like how are all those Scandinavian nations offering free education to their citizens? I mean, we're one of the most affluent and like a nation that's got so many riches from a resource perspective, from a land perspective, like we have just all this, you know, incredible resources at our disposal, but we're just not making smart decisions about it.
You talked about the way you dealt with your mental health. You kept yourself busy, but not everybody get themselves busy, and mental health comes and reveals itself in a different ways and fashion, and people do a range of things. And currently mental health is a state matter, and mental health funding is, to say it is underfunded in many ways. How does the conversation of mental health to be broadened up to across all, for example, Department of Health, Department of Education at the school level? So how does mental health be embedded across all public policy rather than, you know, the way you talked about Cal, have a, you know, give throw money, it'll be solved. So how might we think from a mental health point of view more broadly?
I think firstly it's important to appreciate that mental health cannot be boxed into just, you know, one issue, because like you said, it can manifest into various forms. It can, you know, the severity, the speed at which the onset takes place or is diagnosed looks very different to different people. Having spoken to Mental Health Foundation Australia and other similar peak bodies, their view is that we need a tailored approach in the way mental health mental health support is provided to various communities. For example, you've got Headspace in all these little towns, but sometimes you need to meet people where they're at, because they're not going to seek you out. Maybe it's because of stigma, they don't want to be seen walking in, there may be trauma associated with it. There are all these various levels of, having a service, but the service just as a standalone thing that just sits there, rather than actually goes and, invites people along and educates people, because a lot of it comes to education. Many communities who may have fled war, who may have arrived in Australia as refugees, have this immense, hesitation to talk to authorities or see mental health support as not being fit for them because of language barriers, because of cultural differences. So I think it definitely requires a tailored approach, and there are organisations that are already doing the great work. The government just needs to be brave enough to have different conversations and not just stick with the same process of issuing tenders to the organisations that they're familiar with or that they've previously worked with. You need to start seeing, if there are pilot programs that have yielded incredible results, perhaps, again, innovation. Be innovative with your policies and say, all right, well, let's change things up, because clearly, death by suicide is rising. The occurrence of mental health complications is increasing amongst young people under the age of 18. What needs to be changed? There are many inquiries that are done, but are currently just collecting dust. The reports are currently just collecting dust, being shelved, and it not being part of a national conversation. We had the entire national cabinet come together when it was around women's health and women's issues around domestic violence and women's safety. Why aren't we isolating mental health from that? But not just seeing it as mental health for victims of domestic violence, but for everyone. In particular with, I think, the rising idea of toxic masculinity. How do you combat that so that young men don't feel like there's no place for them in society, that they've got a sense of purpose, that, I'm not sure if you've met with Movember, but that team's incredible in terms of the research that's gone on, but the programs that they roll out to students, because if you don't have the conversation when they're young, they don't really see it from external influences, and that's what needs to be changed. There needs to be a concerted effort in wanting to address the problem.
I think masculinity is a broad spectrum, and then again, as I said earlier, I think every community and every subgroup will have good and bad, and it's just the understanding, and it takes effort to understand each problem in more detail. You can't, for example, as a default blame one problem in the whole group.
No.
You can't blame the whole group for one problem, as talked about earlier as well. Thank you. Thanks a lot.